Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from the UCF College of Business, offering the new online space MBA. Designed for professionals in innovative and high-growth industries, beginning spring 2026, students gain advanced business skills through the lens of the space economy. Learn more at business.ucf.edu/space MBA.
NASA's next budget and the search for habitable worlds. You're listening to Are We There Yet?, the radio show exploring space exploration. Hi, I'm Brendan Byrne. Last year, NASA was facing a proposal that would substantially cut the agency's budget, especially its science divisions. Now, Congress has largely ignored the proposed White House budget plan and is moving forward with its own, one that is just slightly less than the budget approved for last fiscal year. We'll speak with the Planetary Society's Casey Dreyer about what this new budget actually funds and how it will affect the space agency. Then, scientists are trying to answer the age-old question, are we alone in the universe? NASA and partners are working on the Habitable Worlds Observatory to answer that very question as it scans our universe for signs of life. We'll speak with NASA's Sean Domagool-Goldman about the observatory and its mission. That's ahead on Are We There Yet? A crew of 4 at the International Space Station is preparing to return to Earth about a month earlier than expected. Last week, NASA announced that a medical issue affected one of the astronauts on the station. It canceled a planned spacewalk. And now NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman said that while the astronaut is stable, the decision was made to bring them home for further evaluation.
After discussions with Chief Health and Medical Officer Dr. J.D. Polk and leadership across the agency, I've come to the decision that it's in the best interest of our astronauts to return Crew 11 ahead of their planned departure.
It's the first time NASA's cutting a mission short for medical reasons. The crew of 4 is preparing to depart the station as early as Wednesday. Here's Crew 11 Commander Mike Fink.
We are getting ready. One part of us are getting ready to leave this beautiful space station, and another part is getting ready to take over full command and get ready to be ready for another Dragon crew to come.
That next Dragon crew will launch no earlier than February 15th, leaving the station with a staff of just 3 people until then. Stay up to date on this mission by visiting our website, cfpublic.org/space. But now let's talk budget. A proposal by the White House would cut NASA's budget substantially, a 25% reduction overall and 47% cut to NASA science. That proposal has largely been rejected, and Congress is moving forward with an appropriation that would only cut about 1% of NASA's current budget. It's making its way through Congress now before it heads to President Trump's desk for his signature. Last week, we spoke with the Chief of Space Policy at the Planetary Society, Casey Dreyer, about this new budget legislation when it was introduced. Here's that conversation now. Casey, welcome back to Are We There Yet?
Thanks for having me.
New movement on the congressional funding front for NASA. What do we know?
Well, we've had a lot of good news, and as we record this, I'll emphasize that nothing is finalized yet. But what we have seen is the compromise funding legislation be released by the House of Representatives. This is meant to be Congress's last word if it passes, but all of the legislation's been put together. It funds NASA, it funds the National Science Foundation. It's mixed with a couple of other departments, but the idea is that these are the non-controversial aspects of funding for the fiscal year 2026.
What has to happen next for it to be passed into law?
The House has introduced legislation. They are teeing up to vote on that. Assuming it passes the House of Representatives, it goes over to the Senate. The Senate needs to pass it with at least some Democratic votes. And this, as the legislation as written, is a compromise legislation, bipartisan legislation. Assuming the Senate votes to pass it with a 60-vote majority, then it goes to the White House for President Trump's signature.
Do you have a more optimistic feeling that this will make it through that process and not get the veto pen once it gets to the president's desk?
After the last year, I'm hesitant to make any predictions about politics.
I hear you.
But this is designed to pass, if that makes sense. There are 12 bills in the hypothetical idealized sense. There are 12 individual bills that would need to be passed to fund the government. A lot of times they mush them together in what's called an omnibus, all 12 in one. This is a minibus. It's 3 different bills mushed together. And again, it wouldn't have gotten this far. This is by the Republican-led House of Representatives. It wouldn't have gotten this far if there weren't some agreement already in place between House and Senate and with the White House. No one really wants another government shutdown. This is why they're trying to move pieces of funding forward at this point. So the fact that as soon as Congress came back into session this week and they introduced this right away, again, that's a good sign. And the White House has not signaled any opposition to this bill, and I would not be surprised if the president signed it.
You said that this was some good news. What is the final number for NASA, and how did that compare to what we have been talking about when we've had you on the show over these past few months?
The White House had proposed a 25% cut to NASA overall and a 47% cut to NASA science activities, right? Both of those degrees of cuts were historic. That was the largest cuts ever proposed to the space agency. That level of cut, just slashing science in half, is catastrophic. You would have turned off about a third of all NASA's science missions. You would have left science missions literally just tumbling into darkness, turning them off in midstream, and then ending basically all future development of scientific missions. It's hard to express what the calamity that would have been. What Congress has put forward is functionally for NASA a complete and utter rejection of that proposal. It's a small, about a 1% cut, so about $400 million. Science is a small 1% cut as well, but compared to a 47% cut, that's really good. We're a pretty good place. It funds earth science, planetary science, astrophysics, and all the four big major divisions of NASA science. It funds them at basically the equivalent levels as 2024 and 2025. So this is a huge turnaround. And again, as we're recording this has not passed into law yet. So I'm not celebrating anything yet, but this is very, very good. This is the compromise legislation between Republicans and Democrats in the Congress. And it's a huge investment and assertion that NASA science and NASA itself is critical, and that these activities garner that kind of bipartisan support and are not controversial, and that underlines, that the proposal that came out of the White House was extreme. And, the White House never bothered to try to sell Congress on this vision.
There wasn't anything added to this budget, which, some people were hoping for, albeit they knew it was a reach. Things like the Mars sample return, right? I mean, is there no hope for these big projects that really need congressional funding?
Mars sample return, I think, is the one real casualty from Congress. But at the same time, that's not necessarily a surprise. It was proposed to be canceled in the president's budget request this year, but it was already functionally soft canceled, put on ice under the Biden administration. It was hanging on by a thread, and there was no real viable path forward for any kind of realistic budget pathway that NASA was going to see. And so Mars sample return is dead in this budget. It does retain some funding to support technology development that can support Mars sample return. But that's a huge now problem. And frankly, one of the major things now that Jared Isaacman, the new NASA administrator, can take ownership of. Okay, we've closed the door on this one way of approaching Mars sample return. We know we have a potential biosignature sitting in the belly of the Perseverance rover right now. How do we get that back? Is there a way to kind of start over? There's a number of commercial options that have been put forward, lower cost options, ways to integrate with human spaceflight. Now is a chance to reset on that.
You're listening to Are We There Yet?, the radio show exploring space exploration. I'm Brendan Byrne. We're speaking with Chief of Space Policy at the Planetary Society, Casey Dreyer, about the new NASA budget proposal from Congress. How did the Kennedy Space Center and its programs fare in this new budget?
I will say very well. It also fully funds Artemis. It continues the investments in commercial partners that have been launching so frequently from the Cape. It continues Gateway. It continues the SLS and Orion programs. It also increases funding for human landing systems from SpaceX and Blue Origin. It really is, I think, doubling down on the moon. And there was a discussion in the president's budget about shifting towards a human Mars exploration program. That's not explicitly rejected in this congressional budget, but it's just not mentioned at all. And the funding is really directed towards Artemis. And so the program of record will continue here. So there will be a lot of launches coming up. It fully funds the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. It actually shifts that out of science into the human exploration program to more tightly integrate it with Artemis, which is frankly probably a good idea. It also does support the fission surface power initiative and space nuclear power, which is a huge potential game changer if that can work. And so there could be and likely will be a lot of business coming through your neck of the woods there in Florida with this budget.
We're kind of status quo to last year. Now we got Jared Isaacman. We've got an advocate as an administrator. Does that help NASA's chances with getting a little bit more of that cash next time around?
I think it does. It's very important to have an internal advocate for the space agency within the executive branch. But to be fair, he is coming in. He was just confirmed in December. That's almost all the way through the standard internal budgeting process that the White House runs when it puts its request together. The request is set to come out sometime February or March of 2026. So he's coming in at a point where most of that work has been done. Now, how much is set in stone and how much is flexible? Honestly, nobody knows. Clearly, Jared Isaacman has been building a strong rapport with the president. And of course, that will be the most helpful strategic move to have in this administration. If the president is well aligned and trusts his NASA administrator, that will help him win those kind of budgetary turf battles that he'll be fighting behind the scenes. And so one hopes that he will be able to garner the resources he needs for the priorities, not just for human spaceflight, but all of science, which I'm very happy to say that he does highlight frequently and has made public commitments to. And it's about being able to say we have a strategy being implemented almost now more than even money. Assuming this budget goes forward, this last year you can almost see as just a lost year, right? The White House picked a huge fight with Congress of its own party with NASA and the space program that frankly we didn't need to have. And if the answer is at the end of that, we end up with the same kind of budgetary resources that we had in the first place, but there was so much churn and uncertainty, scientific teams, instead of actually doing these science missions and analyzing the data coming down, were busy planning for terminating their missions. NASA lost 20% of its workforce in a single year. You had so much uncertainty, division, and no leadership. You basically write off a lot of this last year. My hope is that the Trump White House is made up of various coalitions, some of which really want to cut budgets, other ones to do, geopolitical dominance, other people want to invest in, so forth and so on. That the budget cutting wing that drove these cuts, that they will kind of move away from trying to do this and focus on other things while they let the people who are building this more internal strategy of coordinating U.S. leadership with its investments in the space program, including science, that will help ease this and we don't have to run this over again. That's my hope.
We've talked about how scientists are having to change the way that they think about space science because of this. Is that damage permanent, or has it changed the way the science and space industry has looked at how the government funds things in a way that will never go back? Or was this just kind of this was a flash in the pan and we hope this never happens again and we're going to go back to the way things were?
Both from scientists and contractors and grant receiving organizations, universities, and so forth, they will not have the same expectation for, in a sense, the post-World War II broad agreement on public funding of fundamental science and research. I think that is gone and will be gone at least for a generation. The consequences of that are hard to say. I think it helps remind scientists and anyone who's involved in space, whether or not it's just the science side or the human spaceflight side, that we really have to stay engaged with the political process, with our members of the community and fellow citizens, to constantly remind and argue and justify what we do, and to keep in mind about how are we serving the American public.
Casey Dreyer, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Casey Dreyer, Chief of Space Policy at the Planetary Society. Still to come, could there be life on other planets?
So what we're going to do with HWO is look for planets that have bulk properties, like size, mass, orbiting distance, amount of energy to get from the star that roughly matches Earth, because that's the first place we're going to look.
A look at the Habitable Worlds Observatory and its goal to find life on other planets. That's ahead on Are We There Yet? You're listening to Are We There Yet? From Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. There are bears in space, but not those big furry mammals we're talking about. We're talking about water bears. Scientists have been studying these things called tardigrades, uncovering their secret to survival in extreme conditions like space. So, what can we learn from these microscopic organisms when it comes to human spaceflight? We'll find out next week on Are We There Yet? For now, we're talking about a new telescope that will search for planets that could harbor life. The Habitable Worlds Observatory's mission will help answer timeless questions like, are we alone in the universe? By looking for signs of life, like traces of water and oxygen, this new observatory will first look for planets that resemble our own Earth. Here to talk more about the telescope and its capabilities is the director of NASA's Astrophysics Division, Sean Domagul-Goldman. Sean, welcome to Are We There Yet?
Thank you, Brendan. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, we are talking about a super exciting mission, the Habitable Worlds Observatory. Let's talk about its purpose. Why do astrophysicists like yourself need a Habitable Worlds Observatory like this?
So there are both 2 reasons and 1,000. And what I mean by that is the first 2 words of Habitable Worlds Observatory are the habitable worlds part. And every time we build a flagship mission, we purpose build it to do something that would otherwise be impossible, right? With Hubble, it was the Hubble constant. With JWST, it's the little red dots that make news weekly, monthly. With Roman, it's going to be dark matter and dark energy. With HWO, it's going to be looking for habitable worlds in our nearby part of the universe and searching them for signs not just of habitability, but also signs of life, biosignatures. That's the first reason. The second reason, and the reason why there's 1,000 reasons, is every time we do one of these flagships, we make previously impossible things possible, not just the thing we designed it to be purpose-built for. So that includes a wide range of astrophysics in the solar system, beyond the solar system. It will literally expand our horizons just like our previous flagships have for the full astrophysics community. In this case, it'll be in the spirit of Hubble, same wavelength range, but more capabilities.
You mentioned you're looking for habitability and biosignatures. How do you actually look for those things? What would tip you off that there might be something there that needs to get a closer look at?
We are going to do it in a way that, and I make an analogy here. If you imagine you've lost your keys and you ask me where to find them, I would say, well, look in your coat pocket from yesterday. And I would go through the list of places that I typically lose my keys. And so what we're going to do with HWO is look for planets that have bulk properties like size, mass, orbiting distance, amount of energy to get from the star that roughly matches Earth, because that's the first place we're going to look. And then once we see those planets, we're going to look for those signs of water in the atmosphere, a clement climate that could harbor oceans at the surface, and then eventually the byproducts from life, things like the oxygen that plants and algae make, things like methane that some organisms on Earth make, as signs that some metabolism, some biology is active at the surface of that world at a global scale. And it's important to note that we can only detect global biospheres. We won't be able to detect, microbes eking out a little life in a fissure on a rock like we would look for on the surface of Mars or in an icy world in the outer solar system.
So you're not going to look for your car keys in the dishwasher. The same thing applies to this, right? You're going to...
Yeah, and maybe you're the kind of guy that leaves your car keys in the dishwasher.
I might be.
Like the way I'd extend the analogy is like, if we don't find life in the familiar places, we might start, thinking about how someone that's very different from me, where they might lose their keys.
Right. Sean, you're mentioning looking for these biosignatures, looking for these exoplanets that may be in these habitable areas. Is that not what JWST is already doing? It's doing spectroscopy. We can see some of these things that are coming out of it. What makes the Habitable Worlds Observatory a little more powerful than that, or going one step beyond JWST?
JWST is such an amazing machine. It's going to be able to start this quest or this journey or this search, even though it wasn't designed to do it, right? Like those worlds, both specifically and as a class of planets, didn't exist before JWST was finalized and launched. There are a class of planets larger than Earth with a chemistry different from our own that has a theoretical possibility for life that JWST is able to start exploring now. The arguments about that, because the worlds are so unfamiliar, are intrinsically a little bit more controversial than looking for signs of life that we would recognize in a more familiar context. And there's a debate ongoing in the astrophysics community about those observations and whether or not those planets could even harbor life, much less do harbor life. There's a difference between that and what we're doing with HWO, which is designing the observatory from the ground up to do one of the most difficult observations possible, which is to look for those signs of life and design the whole observatory around that. So we can look for the specific signs that we think would be, for lack of a better word, a home run, that we think life could be particular place.
You know, it seems to me, and I've been doing the show for almost 10 years now, exoplanets are such a new and novel thing in astrophysics, right? I mean, you're really writing the book as we are going through this. Like, how does the newness of these exoplanets and the findings you're getting from JWST, how does that complicate how you would design HWO?
It complicates it because the breadth of what's possible is expanding with our observations, even including with JWST. That said, between what we know of Earth, what we know of the history of life on Earth, all the way to where life got its roots on Earth billions of years ago, and our understanding of how planets work more broadly from our detailed observations of the solar system, give us a really good foundational understanding of how life operates in a planetary context. I'm not arrogant enough to believe that we know all the answers. I do think we know enough to do what scientists do, which is to take our knowledge and translate that into testable hypotheses for how life operates in a planetary context, and then go look for the specific signatures that we think fall out from those hypotheses, right?
I want to talk a bit about what the technology will actually be on this thing. What you are describing that HWO is going to be tasked with doing is looking very, very far away at very, very tiny objects. I've got to imagine that this telescope needs to be extremely powerful, but also extremely precise in how it's doing its job. Is that the challenge? And how is this going to go about addressing that challenge?
That is exactly the challenge. And I like using analogies for people. And for some reason, astronomers, we always come back to like, what bug would you be looking at with your telescope, right? With like JWST, it was like looking at a bumblebee. With this one, it's looking at a firefly next to a floodlight from across the country and canceling out the floodlight so you can see the firefly. Or at least that's the analogy we used to use. I went off and did the math one night, and I realized that that's only true if the firefly is quote unquote off and not lit up. And you're seeing the light from the floodlight reflecting off the firefly. That's what we need to do.
You're listening to Are We There Yet?, the radio show exploring space exploration. I'm Brendan Byrne. We're speaking with the director of NASA's Astrophysics Division, Sean Domagul-Goldman, about the Habitable Worlds Observatory. Is HWO just going to identify them and look for these signatures, or are we getting to a point where we're going to be able to, and I say we like I'm involved in this, but we as humanity are going to be able to directly image one of these exoplanets?
That's exactly what we're going to do, is directly image them. And what that means to non-astronomers is detect light bouncing off the surface of that planet that originated at the star. What's powerful to us as astrobiologists is that light, before it bounces off the planet, will pass through the atmosphere of the planet. After it bounces off the planet, it'll pass through the atmosphere again. So we basically get two full passes through the atmosphere to analyze the atmospheric composition. And that's the region of the planet that will hold on to the biosignatures, the gases life makes.
That is insane. That's wild. You're going to be able to do that.
This is one of those, you sit in meetings all day and you're talking about the technical details of how it's going to be achieved, and it all checks out and it all seems totally normal. And then you think about it for 2 seconds right before you go to bed, and you're like, did I fall asleep and am I dreaming already?
Yeah. It truly is like science fiction becoming science fact at this point. And with that said, how close are we to getting this thing where it needs to be so we can start taking these images?
It's a ways away, to be honest. And part of the reason it is the technical challenge is so steep. The very first thing we have to do, is we have to make sure that these questions you were asking me before about how is the exoplanet field evolving and how does that impact what we need to do scientifically, we need to lock that in and understand that incredibly well, not just in a theoretical sense, but a specific, okay, what wavelengths are we talking about? What precision exactly do the engineers need to develop this to achieve? And then we can have an architecture, a design that closes on those science goals. And we can make sure that, and again, in partnership with the U.S. industry base, we develop the technologies capable of that architecture being delivered. Once we have all that, we'll know how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. But until we have those three things defined, it is a concept that we're developing for the future.
I have limited knowledge about exoplanet telescopes, but I know something like TESS looks at a large portion of the sky to find these exoplanet candidates. Would HWO be doing this kind of broad look out there? Are you singling in on something? And if that's the case, are you going to be utilizing observations from other space telescopes or ground-based telescopes to find those targets?
We'll be looking at different targets than most of our other exoplanet missions. The analogy would be like if you think about the difference between a survey where people randomly call people throughout the US to find out their opinions on whatever the topic du jour is, versus doing a census where you're knocking on the doors of your neighborhood to find out who is there, is anyone home. TESS and Kepler, those things are the first kind. They're a survey to find out statistically where are we at and what kinds of planets are out there. With HWO, we are knocking on the doors of our nearest neighbors to find out who's there, if anyone. We are leveraging the survey data in that we know on average how many doors we're going to have to knock on before someone answers. We'll argue about this as the astronomy community a lot. It's about 10 to 20% of the stars should have planets that could harbor life. So we know if we knock on about 100 doors, we're going to get somewhere between 10 to 25 that could harbor life, that are livable houses, if you will. But we're not leveraging to know exactly which planets to explore. We know what stars to explore. We don't have the specific targets yet. And in fact, that'll be the first thing HWO does, is it'll detect which planets around the nearby stars are the most favorable for life.
I know that this is completely speculative at this point, but how sure are you that someone is going to answer that door?
I'm going to answer this in two ways. The first is, if we don't find something, we will have searched enough so that we'll know just how lonely of a place the universe is. And by that, I mean, let's assume we fly HWO. Let's assume it finds 0 biosignatures. Statistically, what that will mean is that on less than 10% of potentially habitable worlds, there'll be life. And right now, speaking as an astrobiologist, if you ask me, on what percentage of habitable worlds does life emerge? I would say, I have no idea. The uncertainty range is 0 to 100%. If we do HWO and do not find anything, the uncertainty range as a scientist, as an astrobiologist, will be 0 to 10%. And so even if we fail, our ignorance of what is out there in the universe will have been diminished by an order of magnitude. And we'll know, again, precisely that the universe is a 0 to 10% lonely place versus a 0 to 100% lonely place. Now, the flip side of that is I do have some confidence that we're going to find something. And the best way I could put this in career terms more than statistical ones. I'm an astrobiologist by training. I've worked on the Mars Curiosity rover. I've worked in planetary sciences divisions and missions before. I have focused my career towards mission concepts in astrophysics because as an astrobiologist, personally, just speaking for me, I think this has the best chance of finding life beyond Earth. I've staked my career on it in a sense, which tells you why I, as an individual person in the field, am confident that we're going to find something.
All we have to do is knock.
All we got to do is knock and find out who's home.
Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate the time.
That was the director of NASA's Astrophysics Division, Sean Domagool-Goldman. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you're not already, be sure to subscribe to the show's podcast feed so you never miss an episode. Do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or really wherever you get your podcasts. Stay connected with this show. Follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. We're at AWTYSpace. And if you got an idea for a future episode of the show, or you want to join us as a guest, reach out. We're at arewethereyet@cfpublic.org. Are We There Yet is a production of Central Florida Public Media. Our intern is Orion Boone. Our producer is Marion Summerall. Editorial guidance from Latoya Dennis. Support for Are We There Yet comes from our listeners. Until next week, I'm Brendan Byrne. Thanks for listening.